Excellent. All right. Hi, I'm Swami G, Terasem Movement Transreligion. I'm here with Tyler McNanny, and we are recording an inspirant video for Tyler. And welcome, Tyler. Let's, tell me a little bit about yourself, pronounce your name, where you're from, a little basics. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tyler McNanny, resident of Vermont, and happy to be living in Vermont, very beautiful state. My wife and I have two lovely dogs, and looking to have some kids soon. So yeah, we're running our own business, and we are super excited. I'm super excited about Terasem. Don't know if you want me to go in details on how I got started or how I learned about it.
Yeah. So let's go into that next. I think, which is, what was, what was the first time? What was your entrance like? Was it an article? How did you come across Terasem specifically? Not necessarily some of the larger, ideas, but how did you come across Terasem specifically?
Yeah, so I met Martine first before I learned about Terasem, and then I think we were playing some Go games, or some games of Go, I should say. And she brought it up, and we met at one of the ashrams and started to talk more about it. And we went to one of the first meetings, and then was really inspired by the group, and just kind of started going to the meetings on a continual basis, reading the Truth is Terasem. And then I think what really, inspired me to be a part of it was how inclusive you guys are and how open you were to new people coming in. I guess inclusive is the wrong word, but accepting of new people. And then what was really cool was all the, those truths. There's some really interesting facts in there, and like history points that were really exciting to see, and started to really kind of open my my perspective on the world, and kind of like where technology was. I had this one idea about technology, and then it started to really expand. It wasn't just on a business side that technology was living, and kind of being that future driver for humanity continuing forward, really. So that was really exciting. And then, over the years, I've really been able to meet all these different people through Terasem, and it's been really, really exciting to be a part of it.
Yeah, that is a great story. Particularly for you, because we're doing this, but you've had a longer history of involvement, with Terasem. So to particularly see how Terasem has been able to deliver on the community aspect, of it, looking for like-minded, people, but also, how, as you said, with the inclusivity, of Terasem, right? So it's like, not everybody is the same, right? You got some people with very different interests and whatnot coming together, but still this very inclusive environment where that continues to meet, introduce you, to people that are taking you to the next, level, expanding on your ideas. So yeah, I think those are really good points in your story and how you've come here. So yeah, that's great. Let's talk about it. I mean, if you remember, I mean, typically in this process, when we go through, what we're looking for is simply that you have participated, right? And so we'll just say, like, have you been to a colloquium, a gathering, and it's like, sure, you've been. Just a few of them, yeah. So maybe let's talk about then. I guess it probably originally said out of Go, but take us a little bit through what you recall, I think, when and where your first Terasem gathering or event may have been. And then maybe, talk about how you've seen, them grow and some of the different types, because you've been to more than one. You have
it's definitely changed over the years. Yeah. I mean, the first one, none of the Zoom meetings were happening. I would say that was like maybe for a year. It was just everyone was meeting, across the country, across North America. and there was no Zoom meetings, so it was all in person. This was like, before COVID time, right? And it kind of had a lot of different aspects. We would, you do the yoga at the end, and your body is physically kind of relieved, and you can kind of meditate in that state. And then before that, you're doing the discussions and reading the truths. And it does have that free flowing effect. Some meetings we'd have a lot of discussion, and I think that's what's really interesting, is that a lot of the discussions sometimes are different religions. Like, you guys have brought in other speakers from different sort of religious movements, and they've been able to share their perspective of it. And then it's come back to more of the truths and like concreted, what are those concrete ideas. And it's really, I mean, it has grown from, it was a small group, and I feel like it just keeps expanding. I feel like when COVID happened, we had to switch to Zoom, and that network has continued to grow. And it's just interesting to see that growth and be a part of it. And you were hearing so many new ideas about what the future of mind files are, what the future of humanity is. What is it like to be disconnected from a physical body and put back into it? So that's all so intriguing. And again, it comes back to the perspective to me, right? Like, when it was the in-person meetings, it was great to see everyone, and you can physically interact and play the music. I mean, you could still do that on Zoom, but now we're getting like a worldwide perspective of what people are thinking about. And it is like this universal these universal perspectives that are happening. All these things are about continuing humanity and continuing your your own personal thoughts and feelings. But then what is the big picture? That's also the other piece. So
yeah, I think that that is an important aspect of this, is that while we're both looking internally to say, like, how it is both a small, like a micro and macro issue, right? Because we are social beings, like, we can't exist without a social framework,
right?
And so even projecting beyond your biological self, we still need this social network, to exist as well. So there's both the practice of like, what am I, and I think that's a really good, premise of this process from a religious, from a personal development framework, right? When you really look at the process of like, how could I be something outside or past this body? It causes you to reflect on what you are, I think, on such a deeper level.
Certainly.
Right.
Yeah. And I think like when I first started going to Terasem, I wasn't really sure what I was thinking about it. Right. It was like, oh, this, like, what is this group doing? It's interesting enough. I could talk with people about it. And then, I'm still learning that. I'm still kind of like going through my own personal thoughts. I grew up in the Christian faith, and not that we have to get rid of those faiths joining Terasem, but it's like this, in a way you can shape Terasem to your own individual beliefs, and you can kind of start to question what you've been taught. And I think that's another important piece. Maybe that's not part of Terasem, but that's like something that's gone on with my own beliefs and thoughts and perspectives again.
Yeah.
So that's exciting to explore.
Yeah, I think this is really coming out. I mean, more and more, particularly in relation to Abrahamic code. And, I really do. I use this perspective of religious framework as software, as an operating system, right? And so the Abrahamic code is very exclusionary. There can be only one code. And I see that versus people who are coming from no, like they were just always atheist, or they're coming from, Eastern religions. There's less of this conflict than people coming from Abrahamic religions, who, even though Terasem's like, the interesting is that Terasem isn't saying that you need to leave, right? The Abrahamic code is saying you can't stay. Like if you open your door anywhere else, like you can't stay, like that's in the code. And so it produces this conflict. I've been reading this journal of the World Congress of Faiths. And so this like faith, kind of just journal of all these different things. And so that's been kind of, stirring this perspective for me.
Yeah, I think that's a very, solid perspective, right? Like you're either in or you're out. And I think even combining religions is like frowned upon, I think would be the right way to say it.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, and the biblical code. And now everybody's much more progressive and modern. And we've adapted some of these social tolerances, but that social tolerance is not in, the Torah. That's not, it's very distinctly not, not there. And yeah, but in Eastern faiths, like you can be Hindu and Buddhist, and like there's not, like when in these council of the gods and the polytheism, there's just more room for that diversity and possibility and other things and all of that coexistence, which unfortunately that Abrahamic code is just like, no, this is the only way, to see that. And yeah, I mean, I think that has, some interesting, progressive, or applications, but largely, I see, and particularly for Americans and people coming out of that there's such so much more of a conflict in being afraid to accept anything new, because you feel like you have to give up something. You can't just make space, for that, in your mind, in your ideas. And yeah, and so we really, and I think the other thing that comes with that, particularly differing perspective that Terasem has, maybe even that some Eastern religions share with it, more Abrahamic religions, is the past perspective that, God made us, not we're making God.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's like Terasem is something that, I mean, with all faith, you take action that day or that week, or as you're living it, right? But I also think that Terasem is more of like you're creating a system that it's like your neighbor who isn't part of Terasem or isn't part of this other group. It's like a base foundation of a religion or of a thought process of a being respectful and being supportive of someone else. And I think that's where it's really open to all these other religions. And it's that future thinking. It's like, what's going to happen when these mind files go out into other galaxies, right? Do they have that code built into it, where it's like, hey, like this is a group of energies that we want to keep moving forward, so it's often like, the satellite disc that we're the Hubble, I think it was. We put the gold disc or the gold record, and it was just sound vibrations, right? And that was like the easiest format for like existential aliens or life to be able to read, right?
I think it was a Voyager. I think those were the Voyager.
The Voyager. It was a satellite, right?
Yeah, it was one of the first ones. It was like one of the first ones we launched out. Yeah, and it had that, like, the Humanity LP.
Right. And like that's the stuff that I'm like really intrigued about. And I think I always think back to that. It's like, well, what is like the base kind of information system that is like, hey, this is like not sacred, but like should be protected, should be preserved and like continued, even with all the bad things we have going on in the world, there's still a lot of good, right? There's still a lot of good overcoming those bad things. And it's that beautiful process that you want to keep going. So I think it's like that. It's just interesting to be talking about that base information system. And then I think the other piece I want to add to that is like looking at technology not from a business standpoint, like Facebook has, well, I guess their Meta now has this whole metaverse, and it's like AR and virtual reality. And I think we're going that way, but I want to see it as like a very neutral, like you can have different worlds and you can have this not business driven kind of location for whatever our human data can exist in. And then the other piece is like, how do you keep using that? The human creativity, humanity, moving it forward. How do you keep using that in that zone, in that area? So that kind of went off topic there, but
No,
yeah.
that's good. Yeah, that's what it's all about. Like this thing, even deeper than maybe we are conscious of it, captures our specific interconnections, right? These conversations, are then, become digitalized, right? But our connectomes are connecting, and these stories, these, tangents that come out, are, are us, they're our unique expressions, right? Because
Yeah.
like I'll keep doing this, like over and over, and there's a structure to the argument, I mean, to like the what we're talking about, and there are similarities, but like everyone's story has like these peculiar differences and divergences, and which are great. So, and that actually, it actually segments well to the kind of the next question in the format of this, which is, how do you mind file? Where do you mind file? Like how do you see your engagement, and how has that changed, since you did it consciously, or even now that like what were you doing when you didn't even know it was a mind file, compared to like what you're doing now? Yeah.
Right. So I haven't actually made a mind file. I've checked out the site, and I guess the thing that really excites me about the site is the way that you're broadcasting it, out to the universe at large. And that's really intriguing to me. There's not that, I don't know of any other like source that's kind of sending that information out for really no other reason than preserving it and to continue it forward, right? I haven't done any mind files in that regard, but I kind of look at it as like the technology we're interfacing, like this meeting we're having, this video call, this is something that's going to be recorded, right? Something, I mean, it is recorded, but something that's, the data saved somewhere. And I kind of see it as like all the ways we interact with technology, even like the world at large, and, just walking outside, even like you're interacting with it. So I guess that's just my excuse to why I haven't mind filed, but I kind of see it as it's really how you interact with this technology, and how, I mean, all your keystrokes in a way are recorded, all your videos, all your calls, that's how you're being recorded that way.
Yeah.
Not through like some conspiracy, but like through some, that's how the technology works, right? So I'd love to see it where it's like all of our data can be used to recreate us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. So, and then, I mean, I think in this, when we're saying mind file, we may be in that context, more specifically speaking about life knot in specific. And there's, I mean, some of this is a little semantic, but, you could say, life knot is to mind files, is, Terasem, is to Terasem, which is that, the platform, the organization is the TOS, not all of the thing. So in that case, we all do have, at every time you walk through life, you're creating some presence, some influence and effect. And then when you, as you just said, when you walk through the internet, you're leaving keystrokes and records, behind you. And so in the context, like, well, Facebook, you can call a mind file.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, Facebook is, following Terasem's hypothesis, in its development of their mind file,
Right.
and that's if you have a digital record of any of your memories, histories, whatnot, Instagram, Gmail, right, all those conversations, and so much more that might be, papers and, thoughts and drive notes, right, your Google photos, right? So behind the scenes, there are entities intentionally going about creating, what you could effectively call a mind file, right? Profiles, mind files, um, so I assume, you do or are using some sort of,
I mean, I don't really use social platforms. I've tried to step away from that, if anything. Our business uses it, but personally, I don't really use it. Obviously use email and calendar and stuff, but I don't have I guess I journal, but that's more of like a physical writing versus a digital format. So I don't know if that counts as a mind file, but it's probably the closest thing.
Yeah. And so, I guess what I'm teasing out is like, is like how and where and when we define that line between a digital data, like, what is our, yeah, our maybe, that terabyte external hard drive of all your personal files, like, where's our simple collection of digital information to where does that become, a mind file, where, and so the reality is that Google, Facebook, the NSA, many of these groups are profiling you, right? And they're creating mind files, and so when you give them up those, those social media stuff, you are curating a third-party commercially based mind file, and you have some access and use to it, but actually, Facebook Meta, owns those memories that you keep handing over to it.
Right.
Most people don't grasp that, certainly. And, I think certainly I've pulled back from use of social media, coming as I better understand, those realities around it, particularly.
Yeah, I mean, I really have a love-hate relationship with, technology. I've seen the good, I've seen the bad. I've read, sci-fi novels that are like, the 1984, right? And like, is that the year? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if anything, I'm just learning how to like, I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, we didn't have dial-up internet, that started, I mean, I guess I was still a kid when we got it, but that was like the start of the internet and this social, like what we call our digital social lives, right? So finding that place, like my parents didn't know how to deal with it. So it's like, oh, you have Twitter, you have Facebook, whatever that is, you have a cell phone. And if anything, I'm just trying to like pull back and like I honestly love the idea of having a landline where it's like, that's the phone you can call me at. And like, if I'm not there, please leave a message, versus like a device in my pocket that does everything, right? And I think we're, on the bigger picture of technology, we're struggling with that, like how it can impact us. Like we have so many solutions with technology that we could solve all these problems, right? But then it comes back to like the business world where it's like, well, do we actually make any money doing it that way? And then I think it's like, how far do you want to go with this technology and get away from your like core values, right? So spending time on Facebook and Instagram, these social platforms doesn't do it. And I think I guess another example that I'm thinking of right now is like photos. You remember way back when like your parents would get they would print all the photos out and you just have this photo album, and you could go through and kind of get a feel for what life was like. Now it's like we don't have that. We have a digital, like, just digital, right? You go through your phone, you scroll through, there's nothing like physical to look at. And, somebody can't just look through how often do you share your photos, right? On your phone. So
Yeah.
it's been changing a lot. And I think it's finding where I'm comfortable with technology and, shaping it through Terasem and my perspectives through it. Yeah.
Yeah. Martina is actually great about, like, she'll print off these books, like, you probably seen some of, she'll just throw, like the, whatever that, the Google,
Yeah.
slideshow will pop up, and she'll just like send it to the printer, and it'll be a book. And that's great because you have, that kind of physical, that physical memory. And I know actually, so much of particularly my oldest kids, Asada and Zion, they're everything was digital. We weren't like printing, like a whole lot of stuff really at that point, because it all just kind of had gone digital. And a couple of those devices, were destroyed, or no longer supported. Like I have like one of those original I shuffle things, whatever, and
Yeah.
like there's these photos that, like, are stuck on it, and like a couple others, there's like, and nothing, there's like nothing works with it anymore. Like that cell phone company is gone,
Right.
and right. And so, you really, you lose, and like some of that is lost. Like we'll never get some of that stuff back, and there is no hard copy, to back it up. So
Right.
I mean, I think that is, and important aspects of it too. And it's great too. So, I mean, on the one hand, journaling, I would say, is more important in the mind filing process, even if it's analog, right? Than, maybe, something else just, digitally based, scrolling through things, and, some of the metadata off of that. However, I think actually it is really interesting when you get into this, how important metadata is, like, to understanding the real, like, interaction that's going on there, right? So it's like when you do post a photo, and it's like, that photo is just an image, and it's not really like what the image is. It's like how long you looked at that photo, and like, all these, I mean, some of these other things that are the real meaning and engagement. So there is something to learn from the darker science, I think, applied to these other, things. And another aspect of that, what I've noticed is the lack of the more social aspect in mind filing. And so for CyberRev and LifeNot, like, they are very similar in purpose and application to what Twitter and some of these other things are doing, but but they're not really developed and engaged to where, like, people like your stuff, and like you're feeling right. You feel a social pressure, or purpose, in doing that, right? Like no one sees it, no one hears it. And so people are less inclined to make their mind file the source, right?
Yeah, because I mean, the Twitter or the Facebook are the easier ones to post to and get the reactions. And what I think part of that too is like, what are the base of those reactions? Like, do you need them just to get some endorphin release, or is it what is that bigger thing you're searching for? I think, like, through technology and my struggle on how I want to interface with it, it's like it's constantly changing, for one. But I think on the other side, it's like I'm starting to figure out what I truly would like as a human, and what we would like our lives to be as we move forward and grow. So I think it's important for anyone to look at technology and kind of ask themselves, what do they really want, and is it truly making them happy? I think that's
Right.
the
Yeah.
important piece. So I don't know if I'm
No, I think, I mean,
even
I think that point really takes it, like, all the way back around, to, where we were beginning about, like, this inner reflection, and about, like, Terasem is not an answer to your questions. It's a question, to your answers, which is very different from how traditional religious structures, are posed, right?
Right.
It's like, it's like there's like and for me, it's always about accepting that there's a variable, that there's something you don't know, rather than accepting a constant as a variable because you're not comfortable with the certainty, uncertainty.
Yeah.
And this is where I think it's interesting then where prayer versus meditation comes in, because everyone, prayer is only supposed to, like, you pray and then you go out and act, but prayer does something kind of in modern things very different than meditation, even though they should be something, is that you're too busy giving affirmations, right? So in traditional, in like Kundalini yoga, the things that you may say or sound like are there to help you like keep harmonic balance and actually to clear your mind. And where prayer for many has become much more conscious and affirmational. So they're in fact feeding an impulse,
Right.
rather than letting go of the impulse.
Right. No, I definitely think that's true. I feel like praying is, what you want the answer to be, or the solution, but that doesn't, I mean, there's a million ways to get to a solution. And I think meditating and being able to clear your mind in that aspect is, to me, more important than praying, if you will. So I think being able to meditate and that kind of thought process in Terasem is really important.
Yeah. And again, I think the full picture brings it all back around, for us, and is holistic, and I think that as you go back and you look at what Terasem has brought together, it is, it is like that, the Jeffersonian Bible, and he goes through and he like removes all of the fantastic, kind of references and just gets down to the nuts and bolts, I think when you look at the truths of Terasem, you've seen that done with, the diversity of religious context in the world. What has the best and brightest of all of these different viewpoints have, and then kind of encapsulate that into a framework that sees the modern world for what it is, and doesn't make the now is the only now, kind of like written in stone, gives us an ability to make changes. And that means that you're always engaged in that process of growth and change. Unlike a more stagnant, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it will always be.
Right. It's like changing of the traditions versus creating them.
Yeah.
And questioning them, right? I think that's the important piece of Terasem is, a lot of the stuff you guys bring up is about history. It's like, history is recorded oftentimes, really all the time, from the writer's perspective, right? Or from that group's perspective. But that's one thing I'm really, when you think about Terasem, it's like, how could you record the history in a truly neutral state, right? Like human history, truly neutral. How could you do it, right? And that's something that I keep like thinking about with Terasem, is like, okay, like this structure would have to be neutral to every party and every group, right? And just a side thing I wanted to throw in there.
Yeah. I mean, to that degree, our entire conception of history as linear, I mean, I think feeds into that, as this, chain of concession of battles and title, to really approach it from not a history of the victors, perspective of history, which sadly, I mean, going back to this, there can be only one world view, kind of term of history that we are coming out of. That
That's an important one. Yeah. I
right,
think it's
right.
like as we get more connected, it's like, well, what happened here also affected this place over here. And there's so many things tying together. And I think that's kind of the next step for Terasem is that we don't have, the world isn't individualized anymore. I mean, there might be a few small islands, right, with like tribes who've never, met the civilization as we know it, but like we are getting ever more connected and it's only continuing, right? So I think that universal thoughts and respect for one another is obviously key and very important.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we have been having a great conversation here. But I do need to include this. I'm going to throw the pledge in the chat here. And
sweet, got it
yeah,
right there.
yeah, good. All right, so if you can recite that for us, and then we'll talk about that, and then just have some concluding comments, and I'll end the recording.
Sweet. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the collective consciousness of Terasem and to the principles for which it stands: education, persistency with diversity, unity, and joyful immortality everywhere.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Well, with that recitation, that really concludes the ritualistic elements of the inspirant video. And despite your long-serving participation and attendance, and even service to Terasem, I welcome you as a new inspirant of Terasem.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
happy to be here.
yeah. It was great. I'm glad we were able to do this. And as always, like I have this Calendly link. I'm trying to be open and available and have more of these conversations, not necessarily recorded, but always like feel free to just pop in there, and we'll have a little one-on-one talk about whatever is going on. Whether it's Terasem or just simple life, that's again part of the the role of the community leader.
Yeah.
So always just here's a sounding board for wherever it may be, and just happy to listen, help, consider, from whatever perspective you might need. And any concluding thoughts that you have?
No, I'm very excited I was able to do this. Glad to talk with you more, and excited to see where this goes. Been here for a few years and excited to continue.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, then you already know like the Terasem greeting. Normally we'd like touch foreheads, but you can like touch your third eye point or whatever and say,
oh, there you
I
go.
am you. I am you.
I am you. You are
you
me.
am I.
Oh,
we are
you
one.
am I.
We are one.
We are one.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Tyler. All right.
Yeah, it's great talking with you.
I'm stopping the recording now.